So I think this lawsuit towards the AI music generation tools is very fascinating because what it really comes down to is, do we give machine learning the same legal rights as human learning? And I don't know what the answer to that question should be, but I think that exploring it a little bit is a worthwhile thing to do because this is going to have huge implications for the future of technology. So in the description, I'll link a video from top music attorney who really goes through the Suno case and the specifics of that. And while she is a lawyer and can give you that perspective of it, I'm going to give you more of the amateur philosopher perspective. But I think it's a really fascinating case. So let's just say, as a hypothetical, you had a friend whose name is Uno, and this friend is just the most meticulous student of music. Since he was 3, he's been like picking apart all of the music of all of the greatest artists in the world and learning everything that he can from how they structure their songs and what actually makes a good song and what's compelling. And then you work with this friend and you give him the feedback on like what you're trying to create, and through an iterative creative process you co-create things together, right? If all the major record labels came together and said, you learned from our music, therefore we're suing you, they have no case to stand on. None whatsoever. But where I think this gets really interesting is now in the real world, there are these AI music tools that actually exist that basically do the function that is very similar to what that person would do who's co-creating music with you. And it's a fascinating question because fair use applies to education, but I think it's really hard to draw a clear differentiating line between education and imitation and original creation. I think that to some degree, all of these things are sort of on the same spectrum, because anything that we're doing and creating is a product of the ecosystem that we exist within, the things that we've learned, the influences that we've had, and the way that we channel those influences through our own unique experience to then create something that is authentic to us. But to claim that every part of something is original to us is just to misunderstand how humanity actually works. Like, every single one of these words that I'm using, they are my words, they are authentic to me, but I didn't create any of them. In fact, if I made up words and just said a bunch of nonsense, it would be meaningless to you. Like, all of the things that we do when we communicate are building on things that have come before us. And that's where it has that implied context that we've all acquired through our life experience. And I think that then applying that question to, like, should we give machine learning that same legal right to be training on all of this music that has been created already, and to learn from that music, and then to empower people to be able to build with it? It's a fascinating question. And I'm not going to pretend to know what the right answer is, because I can understand from an artist's perspective of like that they did a substantial amount of work to create the music that is then being trained off of. But at the same time, if I wanted to play devil's advocate, I would say the music that those artists themselves were trained off of, like they learned from other people. It's a very similar process. And where do we draw that line of where education ends and creation begins? And where on that spectrum is imitation? And I don't fully know, but like, I think that it's entirely possible that these tools can be used in ways that violate copyright. Like if the end user is intentionally trying to imitate a specific piece of artwork, but for these tools as they exist, that's against their terms of service, right? And it would be kind of the same from their perspective as if somebody used like a DAW, so like Fruity Loops or Ableton, to create something that would violate copyright law. You can't sue the software that they used, right? Like that's the end user that is creating the problem. And so I would imagine that they would say something similar about that. But yeah, the training data is what's really fascinating about this, because how do we value the collective creative intelligence of humanity while understanding that the creative intelligence that each of us is capable of putting out into the world is only possible because of all of the people that we've learned from? And is it really unfair to have machine learning that condenses that same process and really lowers the skill barrier to creating music that actually sounds good? And it still takes some thoughtfulness, and it still takes many iterative attempts to build something that you actually like. And I think that there are a lot of things that these music generation tools don't do that well yet, but it's just so obvious where it's going at this point, and that it's already pretty insane what it can do. And it's funny how quickly we get accustomed to that. Like I was playing with it this morning, and there are things now that I'm like 4 out of 10 that if I heard them 5 months ago and had no idea that AI could make music, like I would just be blown away. But it's crazy how quickly we get accustomed to it. And yeah, I am interested to see how this lawsuit unfolds, because not only does it have massive implications for these music generation AIs, but all of artificial intelligence, right, is to some extent built in this same way of learning from the collective intelligence of humanity. And so how do we find the right balance of making sure that everyone is compensated fairly for the contributions that they've made to that collective intelligence, while also not restricting the capacity of these tools to develop and democratize that intelligence further? And I don't have the answers here, but hopefully those are some interesting questions to ponder, and we'll see as the next few years unfold. It's going to be wild to see how these tools become substantially more competent. And well, we live in interesting times. So my challenge to you for today would be to think about all of the influences that you've had in your life, from your parents to the people you grew up around to the people that you've learned the most from, whether that's teachers or philosophers or whoever. And think about how you are, in some sense, this information scraping machine that finds the patterns between all of these different influences that you've come into contact with across a variety of contexts, and how that kind of shapes your perspective. And it's weird to think about it that way. I don't know if that captures the whole story, but there's some truth to that. And then it also begs the question of, we are really shaped by our influences, right? There's that quote of you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. And so, what do we do with that information? How can we make it so that we ourselves have better training data, so to speak? How can we refine our own mental models to be the most competent and focused version of ourselves on things that we actually want to do to make our lives meaningful? It's an open question, and it's one that I'm trying to answer better and better every day. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.